Reasoning Power, Chapter 4, The Law of Logical Synthesis. You are now invited to consider that important law of logical reasoning known as the law of logical synthesis. This law represents the universal experience of human thought rationally applied and directed. The law of logical synthesis is expressed in the second of the 7 axioms of logical reasoning, which is as follows. The axiom of logical synthesis. Everything belongs to a class of things possessing one or more common and essential characteristics. Many things belong to several classes of different, though not opposing, character. The principle, law, and truth embodied in this axiom is employed in all logical thinking. It is regarded as a self-evident truth properly to be taken for granted. It is assumed in all logical thought and is implied in all true reasoning. The following consideration is not intended to be offered as proof of its truth, but is designed merely to elucidate and make clearer the manifestation of this principle in the world of thought and things. By logical synthesis is meant the act of synthesizing, combining, putting together, or arranging systematically into classes or groups two or more individual or particular things possessing common essential characteristics. By class is meant a group of individual or particular things possessing common essential characteristics. The principle of classification as employed in logical reasoning is applied under 2 general methods. 1, the method of practical classification, and 2, the method of logical synthesis. Practical classification consists of placing particular things represented by their appropriate percepts into loosely constructed classes depending upon the general resemblance discovered to exist between the respective characteristics of such things. This form of classification is employed merely for convenience of thought and expression. Logical synthesis consists of the processes whereby reason unites into a general idea or concept the several elements of a number of particular percepts, bearing a very close resemblance to each other in the matter of their essential characteristics. This form of classification or synthesis has for its purpose the creation of an intelligent idea of a general class, genus, or species of things. Such created idea is afterward to be used as material for the higher processes of logical reasoning or logical inference. We now ask you to consider in further detail each of these 2 general methods of classification. Practical classification. By reference to your own experience, you will find that you are in the habit of grouping your ideas of things into certain loosely knitted classes. You think of them as all of a kind for the purpose of convenience, yet you do not make the subdivisions into genera, species, families, etc. Your ordinary classification of this kind you will find arises from your perception of certain general kinds, forms, or classes of relationship existing between the particular things in question. Examples of this kind of relation between particular things are found in cases of 1, the relations of existence in the same place. 2, the relation of existence in the same period of time. 3, the relation of cause and effect, as for instance, thunder and lightning. 4, personal relations, as for instance, parent and child, husband and wife, brother and sister, etc. 5, mass relations, as for instance, members of the same religious denomination, the same political party, the same baseball team, the same legislature, the same club, etc. 6, utilitarian relations, as for instance, coal and fire, oil and light, steam and motive power, etc. 7, relations of common purpose or use, as for instance, coal, wood, and oil, considered as heat producers, or candles, oil, and electric light, considered as light producers. 8, relations of resemblance of prominent characteristics, as for instance, all black things, all sweet things, all solid things, all poisonous things, all explosive things. 9, the special relations of whole and parts, as for instance, the automobile and its numerous parts, fixtures, and attachments. This list of possible practical classification might be extended almost indefinitely, but the above-mentioned more important classes will serve to illustrate the principle employed and observed in all such classification. You will find it of great importance to cultivate this form of classification by tying your notions of things into separate bundles, by placing them in the appropriate pigeonholes of memory, by cross-indexing them, as it were. You will be able to perform your work of practical thinking and efficient thought with a minimum expenditure of time and effort, and with a maximum of desirable results. Put things into classes in your mind, but be careful that each thing properly belongs in that class, else you may experience trouble when you have need to refer to that class of things. You cannot well classify things properly unless you have previously acquired clear and correct percepts or concepts of them. The man who has the materials of thought well classified and systematically arranged will be able to think out the desired answer long before the man not so prepared is able to do. Indeed, the latter person may not be able to do it at all. System in the classification of ideas, information, and knowledge will give one an immense advantage over others who follow the higgledy-piggledy method or lack of method. Professor Halleck well says, whenever a person is comparing a fact in order to put it in the same class with other specimens, he is thinking. Comparison is an absolutely essential factor of thought, and classification demands comparison. The man who has not properly classified the myriad individual objects with which he has to deal must advance like a cripple. He only can travel with 7-leagued boots, who has thought out the relations existing between these stray individuals and put them in their proper classes. In a minute, a businessman may put his hand on any one of 10,000 letters if they are properly classified. In the same way, the student of any science can, if he studies his subject aright, have all his knowledge of any subject classified and speedily available for use. You'll be able to put the same thing into very many classes under the method of practical classification. The more classes, the better, for each class relation gives you another handle with which to grasp the thought of that thing when you need it. Each is another cross-index by means of which you may find it when it is required. Some psychologists indicate the process of practical classification by the name or term of apperception so as to distinguish it from the classification of logical synthesis known in logic as conception. The important mental process known as apperception is overlooked in most works dealing with the subject of formal logic. Indeed, this particular subject belongs rather to the field of practical logic. Professor Gordy says, apperception is the most fundamental form of mental activity. It is that combining activity of the mind that brings order and harmony of related facts into the consciousness of relations. In the processes of constructive imagination, the factor of apperception, or the knowledge of practical relations, is a very important element. Practical logic is largely concerned with the discovery of the practical relations between things and the proper classification of such relations. Unrelated knowledge is only half knowledge. Be keen in your search for relations and be careful in your classification of them after they are discovered. Men advance by reason of their discovery of new relations in things and by properly classifying and indexing these in their minds. Halleck well says, whenever one learns a new thing, apparently unrelated to any other part of his knowledge, he should make haste to form connections. In doing this, he will think. This then is what the method of practical classification means. As for the method of logical synthesis or generalization, that is another story. You have doubtless noted that under the method of practical classification, the arrangement into classes is made according to the quasi-attributes or the external characteristics of the different things, rather than according to the true qualities, properties, and attributes, the internal characteristics of the different objects. In logical synthesis or generalization, the division and classification proceed according to strict logical requirements. In it, only the true qualities, properties, and attributes are taken into consideration. Only the internal characteristics are employed in the process of logical classification. Logical synthesis or generalization. Logical synthesis or generalization is the act or process of bringing two or more particular percepts agreeing in some important point or points of character into a common or general class under a common or general head, name, or term, or to bring a particular fact or series of facts into a wider circle of similar facts to which an appropriate term has been affixed. The general idea, class, or conception thus produced is known as a concept. The concept so produced is the general idea or notion, or the idea or notion of a general class of things, which is composed, constituted, and made up of a number of particular ideas of particular individual things possessing class characteristics in common. The term applied to the concept becomes the class name. In logical synthesis or generalization, the term class does not, as in practical classification, mean merely a crowd, collection, aggregation, or assembled number of individuals not necessarily possessing essential internal characteristics. Instead, it here clearly means an indefinite number of individual things, perhaps far apart in time or space, which possess certain essential internal characteristics in common and which are practically identical and alike in those essential respects. In logical synthesis or generalization, many individual things are carefully compared for resemblances and agreement, their respective non-essential differences and disagreements being laid aside in the general classification. That is to say, if the several things agree in the major characteristics, then their disagreements in the minor characteristics are overlooked in the general classification. These minor disagreements, however, may later form the basis for the formation of subclasses, etc. Agreements are the basis of synthesis. Disagreements are the basis of analysis. In this way, all concepts of classes, orders, families, species, and genera arise. Let us take the general concept of bird as an illustration. The conceptual term bird is defined as any and every feathered, winged, warm-blooded, egg-laying, biped vertebrate, great or small, young or old. Here, then, are the essential common parts, elements, and factors, qualities, properties, and attributes which each and every bird and all birds in normal condition must possess in order to constitute them true birds. 1. A vertebrae. 2. Two legs. 3. Wings. 4. Warm blood. 5. Feathers. 6. Egg-laying functions in the female. 7. All in combination in the same animal at the same time. Bats and butterflies are not birds, though they have wings. Flying fish and flying squirrels are not birds, though they fly. Reptiles are not birds, though some of them lay eggs, and so on. All the essential characteristics must be present in the same animal at the same time. The creatures just mentioned, while possessing some of these characteristics, lack others and so cannot be birds. The concept of birds may be synthesized into the greater concept of vertebrates, and this in turn into the still greater concept of animals, and this again into the still more general concept of natural objects. Likewise, the concept of birds may be analyzed and separated into its various subclasses, families, species, subspecies, varieties, etc. As we have already said, synthesis proceeds according to resemblances. Analysis proceeds according to differences. Note, it must not be overlooked that while the stricter and more precise forms of logical classification deal with concepts of classes composed of many individuals having only a few common characteristics, yet there are certain forms employed in logical reasoning in which a certain variation of this particular principle is manifested. These forms are as follows. 1. Class concepts in which many objects or individuals possess practically only one common essential characteristics. And 2. Class concepts in which are included merely one individual or object having one or more special characteristics. Examples of each are given in the following 2 paragraphs. A. The class concept may include many individuals having practically but one common essential characteristic. as, for instance, class concepts of white things, colored things, beautiful things, live things, dead things. In fact, any kind of things having but one essential quality necessary to admit them to the class. Any quality or condition may serve as the basis for such classification and as the one essential quality or element of such concept. Thus, when we say this thing is sweet, we place it in the class of sweet things, the one essential attribute of such class being sweetness. B. The class concept may include only one individual or object having one or more special qualities or conditions. For example, the Eiffel Tower, the Capitol at Washington, the Washington Monument, the Rosetta Stone, Niagara Falls, Napoleon Bonaparte are each in a class by itself, and each has some special characteristic distinguishing it from all other things. Here, the individual or object constitutes the whole thing of its special class. These two special forms of class concepts are, of course, capable of being synthesized into greater class concept, but only the first mentioned may be analyzed into subclasses. The latter defies analysis of this kind, for it consists of only one individual. In forming concepts by logical synthesis or generalization, care must be taken to discriminate between one, the essential characteristics of the various individual things you wish to combine into a general class, and two, the non-essential characteristics possessed by some but not all of the particular things. An essential characteristic is a characteristic which is common to the whole class, one which is necessary to entitle the individual to admission to the class. A non-essential characteristic is a characteristic which a member of a class may or may not have, which is not necessary to admit him to the class, but which does not deter him from it. The true essential characteristics of the bird concept are those previously noted, that is, vertebrae, 2 legs, wings, warm blood, feathers, egg-laying in combination in the same individual. The non-essential attributes possessed by the individual members of the class are, for example, differences in coloring, in general or special conformation, size, food habits, nest building habits, configuration of beak, bill, feet, wings, tail, body, etc. Such widely varying creatures as owls, sparrows, eagles, condors, vultures, wrens, hummingbirds, cranes, storks, crows, ostriches, parrots, woodpeckers, etc., all have the essential characteristics denoting birdness. Yet each has many non-essential characteristics which have nothing to do with the case of their birdness. The concept is a mental symbol, yet it cannot be pictured as a mental image. The mind is able to grasp the conceptual symbol of bird, yet it cannot picture the concept bird. It cannot visualize it. Think over this for a moment and you will see just why this is so. You may visualize or picture a bird, but you cannot do this with the abstract conceptual idea of bird, i.e., all birds. This because of the ever-present non-essential characteristics found in each and every bird in different form and kind. Each bird having some of them, but no bird having all of them. Each of them is present in some birds, but none of them is present in all birds. A picture of the concept bird, i.e., all birds, would have to portray a creature having at the same time and place the long legs of the crane or stork and the short legs of the wren or sparrow, the long bill of the hummingbird, the snipe, etc., the short bill of the sparrow or wren, and the beak of the eagle, the claws of the hawk, the feet of the chicken, and the webbed feet of the duck, the neck of the swan, of the crane, of the wren, of the sparrow, and of the duck, not to speak of the almost infinite variation of color, size, relative proportions of the several parts of the body, etc. An attempt, even a feeble attempt, to produce such a picture would result in a production equaling the vision of the sufferer from delirium, tremors, or the creation of some of the post-futuristic schools of art. So you see, the concept can exist merely as a mental symbol, never as a mental picture. Like the mathematical symbol, it exists merely for the purposes of work. Without such symbols, moreover, logical reasoning would be impossible. Rules of logical synthesis or generalization. The following are the technical rules employed in the formation of concepts by logical synthesis or generalizations. 1. Discover the essential characteristics. First, discover the essential characteristics necessary to admit the particular individual things into the general class, entitling them to the class term, and making the ideas of them proper elements of the concept. This is done by comparing the individuals regarded by you as promising candidates for admission to that class. This comparison will reveal A, characteristics possessed by only some of the individuals. These cannot be canceled, therefore, they are perceived to be essential characteristics of that class of things and consequently are the essential elements of the concept representing that class. 2, admit only the essential characteristics. Admit to the concept only the essential characteristics which have been discovered in the class. Rule out the canceled non-essentials. The essential characteristics of the class constitute the essential elements of the concept. Nothing but such essential elements belong to the concept. Nothing that does not belong to the concept must be included in it. 3, include all qualified individuals. Include in the concept each, every, and all individual percepts or lesser concepts which possess all the essential elements, i.e., all the essential characteristics of the class, but exclude all individual percepts or lesser concepts which have not all such essential elements. The concept must include all that belongs to it, but nothing that does not belong to it. 4, synthesize in logical sequence. The synthesis of the individuals into classes and of these into higher classes should proceed according to logical sequence, i.e. A from lower to higher, B from simple to complex, C without omission of a logical intermediate stage, without a logical break. For instance, it is illogical to synthesize horses, trout, and swallows directly into the great class of animals. Here, the logical method and sequence requires the recognition of the respective intermediate classes known as mammals, fishes, and birds before the great class of animals is reached. 5. Synthesize in uniform order. The process of synthesis should proceed in uniform order and according to the principle of classification adopted in beginning it. For instance, it is logical to classify individual men, either A, according to race, as for instance, into the subclasses known as Caucasians, Mongolians, American Indians, etc., or B, according to religion, as for instance, into the subclasses known as Christians, Buddhists, atheists, etc. But it is illogical to confuse and confound these two respective divisions of classification. We may logically group men into branches of a great religion, and these into divisions, and these into the whole great religious class itself. Likewise, we may logically group men into subraces, these into minor races, these into major races, and these into the whole family of mankind. But it is illogical to classify men as follows: Caucasians, Buddhists, Mongolians, Christians, American Indians, atheists, etc. This because such classification is contrary to nature, lacks rational order, and is confusing and misleading. This being so, it tends to fallacious reasoning when the faulty concepts are employed in induction or deduction. You will see this more clearly if you stop to consider that a Caucasian may be either a Christian or an atheist or a Buddhist, but he cannot be either Caucasian or an American Indian. He must remain a Caucasian. Likewise, a Mongolian may be either a Buddhist, a Christian, or an atheist, but he cannot be a Caucasian. The validity of this rule arises from the fact that it agrees with the foregoing 4 other rules. When it is violated, one or more of the other 4 rules, usually all of them, are likewise violated. Note, we would call your attention here to this important principle involved in all concepts or logical classifications. The more general the class, the fewer are its essential elements or characteristics, and the larger the number of individuals included in it. Likewise, the less general the class, the more numerous are its essential elements or characteristics, and the fewer are the number of individuals included in it. Example, consider the following concepts in the light of the above statement. bird, finch, sparrow, a particular member of the finch family. Chippy, a particular member of the sparrow family. That particular chippy, a particular individual of the chippy family. Here you pass from the consideration of all birds, comprising countless individuals with but very few essential characteristics, by gradual stages down to the consideration of but one bird, with a multitude of essential characteristics. Each individual, in a sense, is in a class by itself, inasmuch as no two individuals are precisely alike.